Well, as the closest ally in the European Union to both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Viktor Orban is hoping to use his rather unique position for a favorable exception to U.S. measures targeting Russia over the war in Ukraine. Now, as he meets with the U.S. president in Washington Friday, the Hungarian prime minister is expected to seek a waiver on American sanctions on Russian oil. Hungary, of course, is heavily dependent on Russian fossil fuels, and this despite EU efforts to wean itself off since the start of the war in Ukraine. For more on this, France 24's Leela Jacinto joins me now on set. Leela, we are awaiting the arrival of the Hungarian and American leaders. You can see those pictures at the White House there. But in the meantime, what is on the agenda for these talks?
Well, as you mentioned, top of the agenda is Russian oil and Viktor Orban's bid at this meeting to try and get a waiver on those sanctions. And mind you, this is his Orban's first visit to Washington since Trump returned to the White House. Orban was a frequent visitor when Trump was out of the White House during the Biden years to Trump's Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. But this is the first time this is an official visit to the White House. And, the biggest thing on the agenda, as you mentioned, getting this waiver. Now, this meeting comes really just weeks after the Trump administration slapped sanctions on two of Russia's largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. And Hungary is heavily dependent on Russian oil. Unlike a lot of other European countries that cut back its dependence on Russian oil since the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Hungary's dependence has actually increased from 61% on the eve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine to 86%. So, Hungary has put itself, frankly, in a very weak position of dependence on Russian oil. This was all going very well while Trump was attempting to reach out to Putin. But when that failed, and when the U.S. slapped sanctions on Moscow, mind you, these were the first sanctions that the Trump administration slapped against Russia. Viktor Orban, meanwhile, has been rather forthright. In his interviews with the media since these sanctions were announced, he's called Trump. He said that Trump has made a mistake from the Hungarian point of view. And of course, from a Hungarian point of view, these sanctions are very bad news because, high oil prices means high energy prices. It has an inflationary effect on the economy. And under these sanctions, Washington has basically given firms dealing with these Russian oil companies 1 month to cut out on their business dealings with these two companies or face secondary sanctions, which is cutting out access to U.S. banks, insurers, shipping, trade, etc. So the stakes are pretty high now as we await Orban's visit to the White House and looking for what could be the outcomes of this high-stakes meeting.
So in the meantime, Leela, there are quite a bit of domestic stakes, obviously, for Viktor Orban. What are some of the things that he's going to be paying attention to and considering in these meetings with that in mind?
Well, the domestic stakes are really parliamentary elections next year. They're scheduled for April, so we have barely 5 months more to go. And now Orban has been in power for 15 years. And for the past 15 years, an Orban election victory in Hungary was almost a foregone conclusion. But things are changing on the domestic front. After 15 years in power, there are some signs of Orban fatigue inside Hungary. Opinion polls are showing that there is now a credible challenger to Orban. His name is Peter Magyar. This is a conservative politician. He actually began his career in Orban's Fidesz party, but is now taken on the leadership of the opposition Tusk party. And he's been leading in the opinion polls. This is a new thing that we have seen in Hungary, because basically what we saw in Hungary was a sort of electoral autocracy, where the media was increasingly controlled, consolidated by pro-Orban forces. So on the domestic front, Orban really has his eye on the economy. And this is where these sanctions are really going to cut, because increasingly Hungarians are showing some signs of getting fatigued by all these populist measures of Orban. And, I'm increasingly focused on what's in it for them in terms of the economy, rising prices, healthcare, etc. On the foreign policy front, Orban began this year on a very strong footing. As you said, a friend of President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And it reached a sort of a high point a couple of months ago when there was talk about a Trump-Putin meeting which would happen in Budapest. But that got cancelled. I mean, Trump is frustrated with Putin because Putin is not giving him peace in the Ukraine and a Nobel Peace Prize. And so those, this much touted meeting in Budapest was cancelled. And so sort of Orban's big foreign policy moment faded away before it even came into fruition. And so it's been 10 months since Trump has returned to the White House. And it's been 10 months for Orban to get this Washington visit with Trump, which other European leaders have got much earlier.
Now, Leela, Trump has very warm relations with Viktor Orban, obviously. How is that expected to affect the outcome of that meeting, if at all?
Well, many analysts think that Trump is not really going to throw his old friend Orban under the bus. He will give him some symbolic wins. He could give him some extensions on the sanctions. Remember, Trump, a lot of Americans are now looking at Hungary to realize how much Trump has played Orban's playbook in terms of how he has governed, in terms of attacks on civil society, etc. So Trump is very supportive of this far-right leader. But, both these leaders have a nationalist self-interest at heart. And so if Trump is going to give Orban some symbolic wins, he will ask something from Hungary, and that is most likely to be buying U.S. technology, nuclear deals with the U.S. So Orban really, the time will come where Orban will have to pay at this point.